Hello and welcome back to Doc Talk episode 8B.
What? Wow.
All right, so the New Testament portion covers what happens between Caiaphas's house and the cross, I guess. So last week we talked about him going before Annas and Caiaphas, and so they decide, yes, we're going to do this. We're going to crucify him, and we've got to do it quick because today is the eve of Passover, and we're going to be really busy today, and we got to hurry up, and we got to get this taken care of. So they decided to go before Pilate because they actually didn't have the authority to sentence him to death. The Romans had to do it. All right, so Luke 23:1, and we're going to, like we did last week, we're going to go through all four Gospels, and we're going to create a beautiful picture using all four. So, but we're going to start Luke 23:1. And the entire assembly of them, having risen up, led him to Pilate and began to accuse him, saying, "We found this one perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Messiah, a sovereign." When he says perverting a nation, he's not talking about Israel. He's talking about he's perverting Rome. He's appealing. He knew that he couldn't take him before Pilate and say he's committing blasphemy according to our Torah because Pilate didn't care about that.
Like, well,
Pilate already was irritated with all their weird, just to give you an example, when he was seeing Caiaphas, Pilate actually, I just learned this year, Pilate actually appointed Caiaphas, and he was the high priest the entire term that Pilate was there. It wasn't until the next emperor came, or the next governor, came, that another high priest, so they had a relationship.
Yeah. So when was Annas? Before Pilate came?
I guess.
Because Annas was the prior one.
Yes, he was. Yeah. Annas was the prior high priest. But it said
he lost the bid.
Yeah, I think the Caiaphas was his son, so it just got passed down, Yeah. But evidently Pilate and Caiaphas had a little relationship. So he invited them to come in. He's like, "Well, why don't you come in and we'll talk about it?" And they wouldn't do it because
Passover.
Because Passover was here. According to the oral law, if you go into a Gentile's house, not a Jewish house, a Gentile's house, you had to go through a 7-day purification process because it was very common for the Gentile pagans to bury their dead in their house or on their premises. And
you never knew what was or wasn't.
That's right.
So
you just didn't know.
Be careful.
Okay, so going on in 3, and Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the sovereign of the Jews?" And answering him, he said, "You say it." And Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no guilt in this man." Now, let me paint this picture. So, it's the eve of Passover. Every eve of Passover, Pilate, in the spirit of freedom, which was the Passover story, in the spirit of freedom, he released a prisoner. So, when Pilate got up that morning, his idea was, I'm going to go sit on the bema seat, and I'm going to ask who they want to be released, and I'm going to release a prisoner. See, he didn't really care about the Jews, and he didn't really care that he was claiming to be the king of the Jews. So he said, "Look, I don't see any fault with him." So then he found out he was Galilean. So he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to send you to Herod." So he sent him over to Herod. Now, Herod was excited to see Yeshua because Yeshua had been dodging Herod all through his ministry because Herod was hunting him. Herod is the one that called for the beheading of John the Baptist. So, but he was so excited to see Yeshua because he wanted to see him perform a miracle. He wanted to see a sign. And, Jesus says in Matthew 16:4 that a wicked and perverse generation seeks after a sign. So, we need to be very careful with that now that we're not prophet seekers, sign seekers, miracle seekers, that we're not trying to push the Holy Spirit into performing all these signs and wonders for entertainment purposes.
And Herod wanted to be dazzled.
That's right.
He wanted to show.
He wanted to show like a magician.
Right. And Herod was used to having those dancers and jokers and showmen. He was used to being entertained. So it was
I mean, Yeshua was famous in the Galilean area for his extraordinary
and what a dinner
miracles.
Party. Come change my water to wine.
Right. Yeah. I can see that. So Herod mocks him, robes him, and sends him back to Pilate. He can't find any fault with him either. So Pilate, let's see, in John 18:30, starting in 33, then Pilate went back into the palace and called Yeshua and said to him, "Are you the sovereign of the Jews?" Yeshua answered him, "Do you say this from yourself, or do others talk to you about me?" Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Your own nation, the chief priests, have delivered you to me. What did you do? Yeshua answered, "My reign is not of this world. If my reign were of this world, my servants would fight. So then I should be delivered to the Jews, but now my reign is not from here." Then Pilate said to him, "You are a sovereign then." Yeshua said, "You say it, because I am a sovereign. For this I was born, and for this I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice."
And just so you know, sovereign means king.
Right. Absolutely. After Pilate speaks with Yeshua, he really cannot find any reason that he should be put to death. He just can't. So if you've ever seen The Passion of the Christ, it's horrible. But he had him flogged, beaten. Yes.
I was going to add really quick about the flogging. You know, in this week's Torah portion, it talks about how they would never go, 40 was the max.
Right.
And so they would always do 39 under that.
Right.
But here's what's interesting was Yeshua took the full brunt force. So Yeshua was given over to Romans. They didn't care.
Right.
They flogged
that's a
however
good point.
many.
That's a good point, because a lot of people teach that he had 39 stripes, and that's just not true, because the Romans had no limit. They had no mercy. They had no mercy at all. And I thought this was really interesting. So he had him flogged, and then he was robed with a purple robe, crowned with the crown of thorns, and he was rejected. The next time we see him, he will be robed, he will be crowned, he will have a scepter, and he'll be accepted. And so I just want to read Hosea 5:15, because it's very telling of what's to come. It says, "For I am like a lion to Ephraim, and like a young lion to the house of Judah. I myself tear them and go. I take them away, and there is no one to deliver. I shall go. I shall return to my place until they confess their guilt and seek my face. In their distress diligently search for me and say, 'Come and let us turn back to Yahweh, for he has torn, but he does heal us. He has stricken, but he binds us up.'" So until they see who Yeshua really was and realize the offense that their ancestors did, he's not coming back.
And our ancestors too.
Right.
Like, that goes back to that one new man. You notice it's the Judah and Ephraim, the one who will become one. Well, we're in that
We're
also.
coming through Judah. We're
in.
grafted in. So they're our ancestors as well.
Exactly. And we're just as responsible for that too. Every time we come to him, we are a part of that, calling him back, a part of Israel, because we're grafted in. We are strengthening Israel.
That's right.
When we pray.
And when we represent him correctly, they will see that he was the Messiah.
Absolutely.
But until we, as the body, represent him correctly, they're not.
We're blinding.
They're not going to see.
We're blinding.
We're
our
blinding.
brothers and sisters.
Yes, we're blinding them. Anyway, okay. So he presents him and says, "Behold the man." And they say, "No, no, crucify him, crucify him." And again, Pilate says, "I don't have any fault with him." So I mentioned earlier that on this day, he was going to release a prisoner. So he decides, so he goes back to his bema seat, is what it was called. And he says, "Okay, I have, on this day, I present to you a prisoner. Do you want Yeshua of Nazareth?" And they said, "No, no, give us Barabbas," right? Barabbas, which is really interesting because his Hebrew name is Yeshua bar Abbas. And so you have Yeshua the Nazarite versus Yeshua bar Abbas. And I want to say this about Barabbas. he was a revolutionary. He was a zealot. He had caused a riot earlier because he wants Rome out. So he had caused a riot. He, and I guess in the process, someone got killed, because it also says, and he committed a murder. So everything that Barabbas actually did, they're accusing Yeshua of doing that he didn't do.
Right.
And
Judas would have liked Barabbas to
Right.
be in. That's exactly what Judas was trying to do, was get Yeshua to do that.
right, what I thought was interesting when I was reading through this is, here's Yeshua. He is going to take the punishment
Right.
of what Judas was trying to do, trying to get him to do that he didn't do,
Right.
and what Barabbas did.
Right.
And so he took the place of Barabbas, went to the cross in his place, because Barabbas should have been the one hanging on that tree, which I just find that so interesting.
And here's another funny thing, is when, not that that was funny, but when Yeshua comes back, he will do all the things that they were blaming him for.
Yes.
Then he will do it.
Right, that's true. That's
It's like,
true.
you know, it's just like, no, just a little too early. Just like Saul was a little too early, it was supposed to be David.
Okay.
You know, same thing.
Yes. And so, frustrated, Pilate goes back into the palace, calls Yeshua again, and we're going to see what he says to him this second time. He says, where... Okay, wait. Let me back up, because the Jews answer him when he says, do you want me to give you Yeshua? They're yelling, no, no, give us Barabbas. And the Jews answered him, we have a law, and according to our law, he ought to die, for he has made himself the son of Elohim. And when Pilate heard this word, he was more afraid. I think that's great, because Pilate was a pagan, part of the Roman pagan. They believed in gods,
Lifestyle,
demigods. So to hear the Jews, knowing they're waiting for the Messiah, to hear them say what his claims are, he became afraid. Now, what am I doing? He doesn't know what to do now. He's not sure. Should I cast him to him to not incite a riot, or should I fear? So, and then after this, his wife sends him a message and says, listen, do not hurt this righteous man, because I had a dream and it afflicted me all day today. So then he went back out and he says, basically just almost pleading with them, I can't find any fault with him. So you crucify him. Knowing that they can't crucify him, he wanted to throw him back at them and say, you go crucify him if you find fault. I don't find any fault with him. And then I'll end in 15 of John, 19:15. It says, but they shouted, away, away, impale him. Pilate said to them, shall I impale your sovereign? The chief priests answered, we have no sovereign except Caesar. And then they go on to accuse him and say, if you don't do this, you are no friend of Caesar. Basically,
Put him in the hot seat.
yes, putting him in a hot seat, saying, we will report to Caesar that you are allowing a man who is trying to overthrow the empire remain alive. And that's the final straw that Pilate, regardless of what he thought of Yeshua at that point, his power, his prestige was just too much. So he conceded and he let him go.
And if I'm correct, Pilate had already been in trouble with Caesar, I think 2 times before this.
Had
He
I
had
don't
already
know.
been in trouble. So it was...
He was like, 3 strikes and I'm out. I can't.
I really like my palace.
Well, and I know that right after the crucifixion, he remained just a couple more years, and then the next emperor that came along, the next governor, the next emperor in Rome, once he came along, there were just too many complaints against Pilate, because Pilate really was, a lot of the Christian depictions of Pilate is this nice, caring, wanted to save Yeshua, but the history books are totally to the contrary. If he was so nice and wanted to save Yeshua, he would have, because he's the one that held the power to do it.
Right.
But actually, the Gospels really just depict him as indifferent and just ready to give him over when his power was threatened. So,
right. Because the only thing he was scared of before wasn't that it was that what may happen to me. So then it became, do I fear what this possible God will do to me, or what man will do to me? And he chose what man will do to him.
That's right. Well, that's all I have for you today, and we will see you next week for episode 9. Thank you for joining us.
Shalom.